me.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on membership contributions or membership? Great. So the September meeting minutes, so that was our last meeting. As always, I will ask for a motion and second, and then we can vote. The proposed motion is the adoption of the minutes as written, with permission to make, ministerial, typographical, immaterial edits that don't really affect the substance, but make it a document that we can all be proud of. So that's can I have a motion to adopt the meetings with that, the minutes with that caveat?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Cheryl. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Minutes are adopted. Thank you. And then just very briefly, this is an opportunity before we dive into the rest of the agenda. Does anyone have an announcement or an update that you'd like to share with the group now? Okay. As always, if you want to, please share it in the chat. And I guess over to you, Kate. I'm going to go off camera for a bit as we proceed.
Sure, sounds great. And always with the announcements, as you hopefully see in our monthly updates, if you have any events or new resources to share, please, and you want to share with our full mailing list, send those over and we can include those in those monthly updates that go out to everybody, not just members too. So just for a brief update on the mayor's working group that we've been chairing along with some working with some other folks that are members and other people throughout the city. We had a really good meeting with the mayor about 2 weeks ago now, who has been really supportive of this effort. We last fall gave our recommendations on how to make building affordable housing on faith properties an easier process in the form of our action plan, which we have sent out, but I can resend to anybody who needs. In total, there were, I think, 43 recommendations in there. We received in September a line-by-line accounting of where they were at for all 43, and many of them were included in the City of Yes, which City Hall has been pursuing, which is on the citywide legislative level, and we talked about that in the September membership meeting, and others are happening and need to happen just through the agencies, such as appointing faith liaisons within the departments and things of that nature. And there are some other outstanding things that we highlighted with the mayor that we should continue to keep working on. One of the bigger things that's going to be happening that you'll be hearing about coming up, in the new year is that, everything the City of Yes and the part of that relates to faith communities and their properties, and trying to basically expand the relatively small group of the working group, which is maybe 24 people now, leaders from across the city, to really bring more folks in who are interested in it. I know we've reached out to some folks on this call, right, to set up those calls to get an update on various things. But yeah, so just be on the lookout for both the citywide and the statewide Faith Affordable Housing Act that is trying to go through in the next couple of years. That's being introduced this year as well. And if you want to get more involved before then, please just reach out to me and I can loop you into those conversations, send you the action plan that we did last year, or any other information that you might be interested in. And we'll definitely keep you updated as all these things move forward. But, had a really good meeting with the mayor a couple weeks ago and he's paying a lot of attention to the working group and the recommendations and taking it very seriously. I don't know if anybody has any questions before I hand it off for the case study. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Taylor, who's going to be moderating this part of the discussion because he has some expertise in this area. And he's going to be speaking with Esther about security issues at faith-based organizations. Let me just stop sharing my screen. There you guys go. Let me know if you have any trouble sharing your screen and I can put it up for you.
Thanks, Kate. And Esther, we're delighted that you're joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the topic, I think, is straightforward enough. Esther's going to share a case study, and then I'll ask some questions, field some questions, and we'll go from there. So Esther, do you want to introduce yourself and jump right in?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Esther Sperber. My firm is called Studio SD Architects. We are a smallish 7-person firm. We do a mix of all kinds of things, including working with a number of synagogues, which is what I'm going to talk about today. I will share my slides. Jump right in. Can you share? You see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
We'll just leave it. So I want to share a project we recently completed, which was a renovation of a synagogue on the Upper West Side, called Anshe Chesed. These are just a few other slides of kind of mix of work that we've done, including a synagogue out in Skokie, the 14th Street Y renovation, a bunch of other synagogue projects that didn't get built, as well as some residential work. When the community reached out to us in 2019, there were a number of main reasons or motivations for this renovation. First and foremost, functionality. And I'll talk a little bit just about the general renovation, and then we'll jump into the security aspect of it. They had a tiny little lobby. There were no bathrooms on the ground floor. There was no room for strollers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you know this from many similar buildings. The building itself was built in 1929, so almost 100 years old. A second big issue was accessibility. The main entrance that was used day to day was about 6 feet below the sanctuary level, and you could only enter through a kind of back stair. Security was an issue. This was something they were concerned about. And then they wanted to kind of enhance the sense of the building being welcoming and community centered. This is the kind of almost like the parish house of the building. So on this side is the sanctuary. This is the main entrance used daily, which is on 100th Street. As you can see, you go up a little ramp. There's a small vestibule, and this was their lobby. If you went through these metal fire doors, you could go up these steps and reach into the sanctuary, which is above this maze of spaces. This is the lobby, the view you would see when you just came in, pre-renovation, tight space. There's an elevator on this side that goes up to all the classrooms, but the sanctuary being on the other side of this vaulted space wasn't accessible through that elevator. This is looking back towards the front door. You can see the security desk and the main entrance. Behind this wall, if I go back to this floor plan, behind this wall, there was a maze of offices, storage rooms, mechanical spaces. And this is what you can see here. This was the mechanical room. Back here under this big duct was the main rabbi's office. This was the executive director. So not exactly appropriate. The lower level was less problematic, but also very dated. So if you came down those main stairs, there was a lobby. You could enter what they call Hirsch Hall, which was their social hall. There's another space that could be used in conjunction with the Hirsch Hall, which was a gym. In order to enter that gym, mostly people would go through this classroom that was an art room into the gym or through these doors from Hirsch Hall. But if one program was happening here, you had to go through this kind of convoluted maze. Another ramp, a few steps, and these were the bathrooms for this level. And this is a view of this lower level lobby. This is the door to the art room that leads to the gym. This was kind of waiting area for the kids' parents when the kids were doing gymnastics, and the bathroom is tucked up above here. And this was Hirsch Hall. Had a large stage, which was rarely used, and other than that, mostly kind of dated. Less important, but on the 5th floor, there was a floor that was used as a nursery school. In a moment, I'll describe it, but we proposed moving up the offices to that level. We'll talk about that in a minute. So back to the floor plan of the lobby. This was our proposal. You would come in, we would take down that wall between the lobby and that maze of offices and create an extended lobby area with the seating area, 2 non-gendered bathrooms, some staff lunchroom and offices, a large stroller and coat room. So in this area. And then one of the challenges, which we were both very creative and very lucky, we were able to put this elevator that would be able to go not only up to the sanctuary, which was what the community had asked us for, but also connect down to the lower level that we talked about. So if people were coming to services, at the end of services, they were going down for kiddush, lunch, brunch, they could go directly down from the sanctuary without transferring to a different elevator on the ground floor. This Lula elevator, it's a special type of very slow and slightly smaller elevator, is only going up about 25 feet, but it has 5 stops because of the way this building was built. So you can enter on this level. You can also come out on this slightly lower level. You can see we're going down a few steps, and similarly in the basement. So these were the renderings we initially did for this lobby, proposing to open up this area, create kind of a seating area with bleachers. This is the new elevator that goes up and down. This would be kind of a membership lounge, and mitigating the floor difference between our lobby and this area. This is underneath the stage in the sanctuary. We proposed these bleachers that would kind of create a sense of connection, but also enhance the sense of community, inviting people to hang out and spend time here. As soon as we started doing demolition, it turned out there were these huge diagonal steel beams between this upper and lower level. So those bleachers didn't work at all. And we quickly redesigned it. So you see, we added this wall here. This is where those steel diagonals are. It turned out, I guess there are a lot of people here who have faith. This turned out to be actually, I think, a better plan than our initial one, because it created a much better coat and stroller room and a kind of more intimate waiting area upstairs and another kind of hanging out area downstairs. So This is the area no longer looking down into the coat room, sorry. And this was the redesign of the much larger coat room and stroller room. And then looking back at the elevator and the bathrooms. So this is another image during construction. You can see the original steel columns and steel beams. Working in these kind of old buildings, you often discover surprises, but there's also kind of a beauty to trying to work within the context of an existing building. There are, of course, sustainable reasons to not destroy the entire thing and try to be respectful of the spaces. And we really try to create a sense of a space that is new and welcoming and clean and functional, but has kind of respect for the original building and the original design. These are the new bleachers being constructed. And these are photos of the new lobby. We were able to restore the old terrazzo floor that was 100 years old and kind of continue it with the matching terrazzo. Try to match some of the stonework. This is looking back towards the main entrance. So you can see there's a much bigger space. We have the entire space is much more accessible. We have a ramp going down both to the stroller room and that waiting area, as well as the elevator that I mentioned in the beginning. This is the new membership lounge and the courtroom. Again, working within an existing building, this space is a little, the ceiling is quite low. It was what was available to us. And then looking back towards our new non-gendered bathrooms and staff room, and behind this wall, you can access that same elevator that would bring you down to this level. On the lower level, we also kind of reorganized the space. One of the desires was to get rid of this art room and have a bigger lobby, and to create a sound lock so that when programs were happening in Hirsch Hall and kids were running up and down in the lobbies, you know, services, especially on high holidays when they use the entire building, could happen in a quiet space. In order to do that, we took out this stage and created lots of storage, which is always a challenge in these buildings. So half the stage became storage. We added new storage closets here for tables and chairs, the sound lock, and a direct entrance to the gym. We were able to put an ADA bathroom, non-gendered bathroom on this lower level so that people did not have to go up the steps to get to that bathroom. We do have our Lula, our elevator access both from this lower level of the basement as well as this partially raised section. And so this was the rendering of that space, new elevator, existing elevator, entrance to the gym. In this space, we also found one of those diagonals. It was a little bit more manageable. We were able to replace it with a slightly steeper diagonal and kind of incorporate it into our new design. This was a rendering of the gym space that we were trying to, it was going to be much simpler than Hirsch Hall, but in conversation in terms of the design. And this was the new design for the social hall. We spent a lot of time on acoustics, new sprinkler systems, fire alarm systems, lighting, air conditioning, all that stuff that you experience but don't necessarily see in a photo. So this is the demolition in Hirsch Hall. Sorry. Installation of the acoustic ceilings and the renovated space. And then in order to create that enlarged lobby, as I mentioned, the synagogue reclaimed this space that was rented out to a nursery school. to create a kind of appropriate office suite with a small reception, executive director, cantor, assistant rabbi, rabbi's offices, and a bunch of meeting rooms and workstations. That's the rendering. And these are some of the photos. So jumping into the questions of security, part of the kind of in conjunction with the main motivations for this renovation, this happening in 2019, kind of, I think people still had fresh in their mind the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And there was a sense that within the scope of a large multi-million-dollar project, they had to upgrade their security. And they hired a consultant that did a short study assessing the risks, looking at the building, noticing vulnerabilities, and putting together some kind of strategies and recommendations. Some of the things are completely kind of obvious. So this being the main security point within the existing lobby, this is a little confusing because this was during construction. So there's a temporary partition in the middle of the vaulted lobby. But one concern was that if there was some kind of threatening person, they were already within the building at the point when they met the security guard. So that didn't seem safe. Other issues were kind of both had to do with the building itself, but also with the kind of habits that both the staff and the membership had. So this is a back door that goes directly into the caterer's kitchen, and that was often just left open because it was easier to bring, deliveries in and out. And so, having a door onto West End Avenue that's just always left open makes the security guard on the other side kind of useless. This was, I'll show in a minute, but this was a small office right off the main lobby, which was the room that the superintendent for the building used, the facilities manager. We thought this was probably not the best space for it, and also not the best use. So looking at the recommendations and the things we wanted to incorporate, there was a conversation about a lockdown system, certain rooms that would be on this system in which when either the security guard or one of the designated members in the community, if someone felt that there was a threat, they could press a button in the sanctuary or in the security desk or even upstairs in the offices and automatically lock certain doors, which would create safe spaces within those rooms and not allow someone, the intruder to enter. The security consultant recommended a certain level of front doors that were called forced entry level 4. I can't exactly explain, but they would stop certain kinds of shooting, but not others. And that's something we spent a lot of time on and researching and kind of incorporating. They wanted a better security office on the ground floor and preferably within that vestibule between the front doors and the lobby doors so that someone is questioned and let in before they, has to be allowed in before they get into the main spaces, and obvious things like security cameras. And then, as I mentioned, also recommended certain behavioral changes, kind of training staff to be more alert, and training membership. And these things are an ongoing process. So I wanted to give kind of a bit of background just on costs, because I'm sure this is of interest. And also I want to say that I think before we jump into this, this is New York is a very expensive place in general. And as you know, any renovation ends up costing a lot more than many other locations, even synagogues we've done out of in other states or in New Jersey. This is really a kind of personal, I think, decision of each community to kind of determine how concerned they are about security. I think, you know, in the scheme of real threats, most of us are more likely to be hit by a car on our way to synagogue or church or mosque services than be threatened by a terrorist. Nevertheless, I think there are, you know, congregations that feel that they have to, you know, address this concern, both because it's a real concern and because they want people to feel comfortable coming to their worship services. We have worked with communities where this was absolutely not important to them and they didn't want to spend any or wanted to spend a very small amount of money on this. This example of the Anshe Chesed congregation decided to invest more in this. And I think I want to voice my sense that there isn't one correct answer for that. In the scheme of this project, so the entire project was about $8 million. The construction cost was about $5.5 million. And within that, they spent about a total of $140,000 on cameras and the lockdown system and the security company's infrastructure. In addition to that, we spent probably something in the range of the $230,000 on various types of doors, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Putting that in context, we have other things that are mandated. You know, security is not mandated by DOB or the building code. There are other systems that we put in that are either required or that we had upgraded beyond what was required because we felt it was important. So we were not required to put in sprinklers. We did decide to put in the infrastructure throughout the building, a kind of a standpipe that would go to all the floors. We weren't able to sprinkler the entire building. We did add sprinklers on the ground floor and the basement. Again, that was not required, but similar to security, the congregation felt that it was the right thing to do. And we were required to put in a working fire alarm system. They had a very ancient system previously. And again, both those things are, again, fairly sizable investments, and we do them just in case, I would say, right? There was, in the 100 years of this congregation, they never had a fire. But it seems like the right thing to do. So talking a little bit about the architectural aspects of the security upgrades. So the first one is, if you can see this little room that I'm pointing at, behind this wall was that office that the superintendent used. We decided to convert that into a security office. So you can see we opened up this bulletproof glass. The security guard, this is still during construction, but the security guards can see who comes in and unlock the door and buzz them in. People who work here are part of the staff, or the nursery school also have their own card system that they can let themselves in. You can see some of the cameras. The security consultants put together a plan in which they tagged all the different elements that they were going to install. So that includes fire alarm strobes, cameras, and the different kinds of doors. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the doors because somehow we ended up spending a lot of time on doors and hardware. We had both design requirements and functional requirements. So I really wanted these doors to be modern, but have a kind of relationship to the existing old landmark doors that exist throughout the building. So the kind of wood doors with glass panes, with a certain kind of heftiness to them, and to feel like they were doors leading to an important space, not to a, storage room. Some of the doors had to be fire rated, not all of them. Some of them had to be on the lockdown system, again, not all of them. The front doors, we wanted to have the forced entry option. And then doors into the sanctuary or into Hirsch Hall had to have an acoustic rating so that we would block this noise from the lobby into the sanctuary. We considered all kinds of different options, and we ended up, these were doors that were kind of off the shelf that we could use, but we chose not to because they were steel doors that had kind of a wood veneer on them and then metal frames around the glass. And we felt like they didn't look beautiful enough and kind of weren't adaptable to our design. We ended up working with two different companies. One is Dyack Doors. They're kind of a family-owned company out somewhere in the Midwest, who created almost, I think, 30 different doors throughout the spaces that we renovated. These doors were partly, some of them are fire rated, some of them are not, some of them are acoustically rated and some are not, but they all look the same. And the prices ranged depending on the requirements for these doors. We worked with another company called Shield Security that created the front doors that are the forced entry doors. These are actually really hefty steel doors with this kind of bolted system that goes into the floor and the side walls. And but they were able to custom make them to basically look very similar to the other doors. And the forced entry doors they required us to stiffen the wall, the existing wall. So we had to open the walls and add kind of a steel frame because these doors are very heavy. It's kind of thick layer of steel. You can see some of this bolting system. But looking at this photo, I hope you can see these are the steel forced entry front doors, and these are the Dyack doors from the other company that lead into the sanctuary. So very close in the design, and you wouldn't necessarily know that they had different functions and different abilities. It was very important both to us and to the congregation that despite these security upgrades, the building wouldn't feel like a fortress, that it would retain its sense of being an open space available to the community. The rabbi told me that it's important to him that all those odd people that wander into churches and synagogues and mosques would continue to feel comfortable doing so. And it was important for him to train the security guards to be accepting of that, obviously, when it's not a threat. So this is just a photo of a kind of the building being used, this lobby, for a little party. The little chamber music happening. And yeah, that is kind of the end of my presentation, and I would love to, Taylor, to answer any questions you have or anyone else.
Thank you. No, it's so wonderful to see how a good architect can make buildings work again. It's very much.
Let me
that we
try to
believe
stop
in it.
sharing so we can all see each other better. There we go.
And it's just a great example of taking what's there and through strategic intervention, making it work, making it serve community. So a couple of questions came in through the chat that we could start with. I'll start with the second one first because I wanted to ask about the first one as well. What was your LPC approval process like when you replaced the exterior door?
So we kept the exterior door. So if you remember that vestibule, there are two doors out that connect to that ramp, and then there are the two inner doors. The doors that are the new forced entry doors are the inner doors. We did not touch the outer doors. They don't actually lock them during the day. And we were a little afraid of the LPC process. So almost everything we did was interior except for the HVAC equipment. And we actually didn't have a unpleasant experience with LPC. It's mostly not visible, and we got the approvals in time for construction.
So let's go to the first question then about how the work was funded, and whether they were able to apply for any grants, public grants, as part of the work. I know we've had some experience with this, and I'm really interested to hear what this congregation's experience was.
Yeah, that's a great question. Partly, so most of the vast majority of the work was done, by fundraising from the community. There were a few large gifts, and they got many, many small gifts and many in between. And that process actually started almost a year before any construction happened. They did also need to get a bridge loan because some of the donations are going to be given over 5 years. So they had to get some funding to kind of bridge that. I believe they did get a Homeland Security grant for some of the security work. I don't know how much of that was covered by that. So I'd be happy to kind of find out more and share that in the future.
Well, so maybe I could just share the experience of a client of ours that's
Yeah.
has gone through a similar process. They applied for federal grants, Department of Homeland Security grants, were able to secure $300,000. I think there was a max of $150,000 per grant, and they have 2 buildings adjacent to each other. So they managed to get 2 of those grants. The tricks with them were that the grant could not be used to pay for part of a bigger project. They can't use any of the money, part of the money to renovate the lobby and part of the money to replace the doors. It's all got to be strictly security. Now, the way they had planned to handle that was to just bid the work separately, even if it gets executed by one contractor under 2 contracts. But that was a really important thing. The other is when you write the grant, they ask specifically for what are the things the grant will fund, which means write it with your architect, because this congregation wrote it with a consultant who sort of made up some stuff that had no bearing on the work we were actually going to do. However, I just wanted to share this, and I believe this is specific to Jewish Houses of Faith, that this is the organization that they worked with that helped them write the grant for the DHS application. It's CSI Security, Community Security Initiative. They're a division of UJA. So that's that.
Yeah, Taylor, and actually you reminded me that we did, and I think partly it had to do with this exact stipulation that you mentioned. The security consultant who takes care of their security day to day, but also did the infrastructure, not the doors, but the cameras and the wiring and the lockdown system. They were a direct contract with the client, not through the GC. And I think that had to do with the way that they were securing the grant.
Right. And I also know that those grants can be used to pay for operations. So if you hire a security guard, you can use that grant money to pay the security guard's salary. So unfortunately, again, we are in a similar situation where we didn't help write or secure the grants. So that was that client, TSI, that the consultant was the resource that they used. I'm sure there are others out there. The other couple of things I wanted to, because we've got a little less than 10 minutes. I'd love to hear about how they made decisions as a community about security, what their process was, who the players were, and how they got to sort of, because there is, as you say, a great range in terms of what you can choose to do or not do. There's sort of no limit to how much you can improve the security of your building. So how did they as a community work to make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's true for most of the synagogues that we have worked with, where it's a little bit just whoever volunteers to be on that committee ends up being somewhat the driver of the process. In this case, the security committee did include the rabbi, the executive director, and then some community members. Similarly, there was a accessibility committee. There was, the fundraising committee that also had input on design. And there was a building committee, and there was the finance committee. And we spent a lot of time talking to all these committees. I think that the decision was mostly to try as much as possible to implement what the recommendations of the consulting reviewer that they hired. So we did try to include whatever we could that was in the area of the renovation. We did not touch some other big chunks of the building. So their main doors on West End Avenue that go into the sanctuary, they're not used very often, but we didn't do any upgrades on those doors. So there are chunks that are left for the next renovation.
And on threat assessments in particular, I'm interested to hear how that went for them, because they can be tricky. They will describe the threats. So a meteorite striking from space is a threat.
Right.
That's an exaggeration, but they do, like, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, or somebody could drive up a truck outside the building and blow the whole building up. So in what we've seen with synagogue clients in particular is that threat assessments are sometimes useful in identifying the low-hanging fruit that they may be blind to, like the back door that's usually propped open. They can be daunting in terms of the range of risk they describe. But worst of all, they can actually pose a liability that if the security threat is delivered to the organization, and if they opt not to respond and prepare for any of those threats, and if any of those things were to happen, there's a real worry of liability on the organization's part. So what we've seen happen actually is that the document is produced and delivered verbally or presented on a screen, but never handed over. So there's not a record of what the recommendations were. It's kind of a sticky thing. I wonder if they ran into any of that.
Yeah, it was, I don't know if it was only delivered verbally, but I don't think it was public that they got this assessment. I think the main concept was pretty straightforward. I think there are definitely attacks that you don't need to plan for, or you can't plan for, kind of like the World Trade Center, right? We're not designing buildings so that airplanes can't fly into them. So I think the threat that they imagine is one lone kind of bad actor trying to come in and shoot. And so I think the idea is to deter. It's kind of sad to say, but if this is hard to get in, then hopefully they'll give up. So to stall for long enough that NYPD can arrive, and then if they do manage to get in, to have spaces where people are secure, which is with the lockdown system. Again, this is only buying you time. And I think, especially in New York, you know that the police will come pretty quickly.
Right.
I think the question of, as you said, how worried you are about this is really very subjective. But I do know that once these doors existed, people got very nervous if they weren't working properly. Like suddenly it seemed like this was a real comfort for the community or for the leadership in the community, knowing that this exists and they can use it or should be able to rely on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lucy, for dropping that information in the chat. Bill, you had asked about asbestos. You said,
What was the question?
did you find environmental issues before or during construction was remediated part of the project?
Yes, not so much. So the good thing about buildings from 1929 is they don't have asbestos. There were some areas that were renovated later on. So that art room in the basement had asbestos in the floors. There was some HVAC pipes that were wrapped in insulation that was asbestos. Some of this was done prior to construction starting, but some of it was discovered during demolition. And these things, I think you need to expect some delays. So that was one of them. There was a big duct in the gym that had to be abated. And so there were 2 weeks where no one else could work in that space until that was done. In terms of expenses, that actually ended up not being one of the bigger costs or big change orders. I think just because it was an old enough building that didn't get a lot of renovations over the years.
We're about out of time. I hope with this, what Esther's experience and the experience of this congregation has proved is that that real security improvement in historic buildings is possible. That it's most successful when you've got a good team and a good process. That there are resources available. Yeah, and that this is certainly a concern for all congregations. I think it's particularly now among our Jewish congregations. But yeah, there's a lot of improvement that can be done without, tearing things down.
Yeah, and I thank you, Taylor. And I also want to say, I'm sure Taylor has similar experiences, and I'm happy to share what we have learned and some of the resources or companies or suggestions that that we found during this work. And it will give me a lot of joy to save other people some of the time that we spent on researching some of these topics.
In fact, if there's anything that you want to drop in the chat now, or you could send to Kate along with the presentation, she can distribute afterward. That'd be great.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I look forward to getting more of that information also that I can share with folks. I know that'll be super helpful.
Hey, maybe I'll add a page on the PDF I sent you with like some links or resources that
Yeah,
when
that'd
you
be great.
distribute that.
Thanks. Okay, so we have 2 resources today. The first are updates from the Department of Finance on tax exemptions, and then we'll be hearing from Ann Friedman from Landmarks Conservancy. So Robin, if you're there, you can take it away. Otherwise we can hop to Ann.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm here. It's such an honor to join you all. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. I can do this. Here we go. Let me know if that is working. Great.
Perfect.
Perfect. So, Is there a weird pop-up on yours? No, here we go. Great. So I'm here to just remind everyone about the New York City non-for-profit property tax exemption. And so let me move along. My name is Robin Lee. I'm the New York City taxpayer advocate. And well, what does that mean? So quickly, here's the look at the agenda. So the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, just a little bit of background. We were established in 2015, and we help New Yorkers resolve all sorts of tax issues. So I'll get into the tax subjects in a split second. We are independent from the rest of the Department of Finance, so that helps us give a bird's eye view and a little bit more access when we are trying to problem solve or identify issues across the agency. And so areas of issue that we do help with are generally, again, property tax, business tax, and limited excise taxes. This doesn't really impact most of you, unless maybe on a personal level, but for personal income tax and sales tax, those are New York State issues. Also within our office, now this touches everyone that steps foot in New York City and maybe owns a vehicle or, rents a car ever. But if you ever have issues with parking summons or camera violations, that's not to say that I don't think that's right. I don't want to pay this. I pay my own parking tickets early too. But this is just if maybe it could be spots in front of your properties, or maybe there's a camera violation that doesn't seem right. It wasn't your vehicle. Any sorts of issues like this is something our office can help with. And there's contact information below, but you can also just reach out to me. Make sure that Kate has my contact information to share with all of you. If you ever just get those wacky parking or camera violations, let me know. We can help you with that. Also within our office is the non-for-profit ombudsperson. This is written into local law, and the duties of the non-for-profit ombuds is responding to inquiries from non-for-profits that own real property and have questions about the tax exemption process. And I mentioned the lien sale because it's written in the legislation. As it stands, most of you know, there is no lien sale authorizing law right now. We've seen in the news very recently, as in the past week or two, there are conversations happening about a lien sale, but as it stands, there is nothing currently on the books so there is no lien sale scheduled. Here's the contact information for the non-for-profit ombudsperson, nfp-ombuds@finance@nyc.gov. And this is our office's phone number. Human beings answer these phone calls. We handle these phone calls and we take them seriously, and you will hear from a human being, we promise that. I have the contact information shared later in the deck as well. So just a little bit about the property tax exemption. And this is a very wordy slide, but basically, as most of you already know, if you're a non-for-profit, owns property in New York City and the title is in your name, you may be eligible for a full or partial property tax exemption. And again, it all depends on use. And so here are the strict limitations at the very top, that the applicant organization must be the owner, and that the property must be used for an exempt purpose. And here are a few types of properties that may be eligible. And again, all depends on use. And then, the application process will look into all of the factors that are listed in the application. But so say religious services or are residential and owned by the religious organization to house the officiating clergy. There are some exemptions that are granted often for dormitories or hospital staff, charitable uses, philanthropic or artistic offices. So there's all sorts of categories that meet these not-for-profit tax exemption eligibility. To file a new initial, this is the link. It's a PDF, and this entire presentation has been provided to Kate to make sure that everyone has access. The initial application is mailed in, and the it's at the bottom of the application, but just so you have it, it is a hard copy mailed application, and there's guidance provided as to what information you need for the application, the initial. This is very wordy, but again, will all be presented. But really why we're here today is that the renewal process, so everyone that is already approved and is required to, and mostly everyone is required to renew for the tax year 24-25 period. And the deadline is January 5th, so just shy of a month. And the reason why we start encouraging everyone early is that the process, it's online. It's at nyc.gov/file NFP. All of the non-for-profit renewal is conducted online. There are helpful guides. Links are here, but it's also on the New York City Department of Finance website. Often we hear issues with access with your password or technical difficulties using the nyc.id website. So there are guides and contact information just to get you through the technical part. As for the actual renewal process, there's a really helpful guide online that goes step by step through each question. So you just, it's linked here, but it's very, very helpful resource. You can complete it at once or save your work and come back to it. My understanding is that for the renewal process, that most of it is auto-populated. So you're just reviewing the questions as it's prompted to you. Admittedly, they don't give us as the advocate, like we don't have the access to go through the application of the individual units, but what we've been told is that it's for the most part pre-filled, so you're just reviewing. If there are no changes to your entity, to the ownership, to the property, there's no sale in the past year, it should be quick. You can be done in like 15 minutes. Where things get complicated is if there are changes to ownership, there's changes, in any step of the process. So again, we just encourage everyone to start early. That way you're not rushing and trying to submit on January 2nd, January 3rd. And once you have submitted, you will receive an email acknowledgement. And if there are any changes again to ownership or mailing address, we strongly encourage you to address it at that stage of the renewal. However, knowing that often there are changes that are made, things that just become difficult or a little bit dicey, the non-for-profit ombudsperson, again, he's in our office, Arion Checho, incredibly knowledgeable. You can contact him through this non-human mailbox, but it's him. A human being checks it every day, nonstop. We can help you resolve any sorts of issues you're having with the application, or maybe you're getting pushback, maybe you don't agree with the denial and you need just help understanding just a little, maybe more guidance as to what's going on. We can help you with that. So we just encourage you, please, renew early in advance of the deadline. And if you have any issues at all, please feel free to call us or contact us. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see that there are, I think, 4 people have put questions in the chat.
Sure.
Want to
Let's
go
go.
through those?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm reading Jason Labate. Am I mispronouncing that? I'm sorry if I am.
No, that's right.
Department of Finance revoking exemptions based on Class 1 violations. We think there is no legal basis for this. Can it be explained, addressed? Yes. So I can tell you that Class 1 violations is an area that unfortunately I believe actually legally, but it's very strict about whether or not we can approve without those Class 1 violations being cleared up with the Department of Buildings. If there are any sort of immediate hazardous conditions, anything with DOB that has to be resolved, because I think it's pretty much blocked in the system that DOB has to clear it up and give us the green light in order to approve the exemption. I don't know if that answers your question, Jason. I'm happy to hear any follow-up from you directly. If not, the second one you asked, when exemptions are retroactive reinstated, I understand that the taxpayer is still responsible for fees and interest, even if the revocation was wholly inappropriate. Can these amounts also be forgiven? If not, can we discuss this or schedule a meeting to further discuss? Jason, it sounds like you might have a very specific case, fact pattern here. Why don't we talk offline? You can contact me, I'll share it, but also my personal email, not personal, my work email is Lee, L-E-E, Robin, R-O-B-I-N, at finance.nyc.gov. Again, that's Lee Robin at finance.nyc.gov. Let's look into that. If it is tied to the Class 1 violations, I don't know how much we can advocate, knowing that there might be some background we have to investigate further, but let's talk offline about that for sure. I'm going to move on to Tomas's question, if that's okay. During construction at a tax-exempt building, are all costs tax exempt? Specifically asking about scaffolding, construction, fencing. Correct. I could be wrong here, but I understand that the property tax exemption is separate from the construction tax exempt. The construction taxes or taxes tied, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Scaffolding, construction, that's unrelated to property tax. I hope that answers your question, Tomas. Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to move on to Bill's question. What is the policy for a congregation to rent a parsonage to clergy who may be serving another church or agency? So Bill, that's a great, interesting question. I think we'd have to, why don't we connect offline? I think we'd have to know, is the clergyman member that you're referring to serving at multiple, or is it tied directly to this parsonage? I think this is one where I suspect the not-for-profit team and in the property division will look further into it to get a better understanding when you say, is this person residing here, or are they serving here and somewhere else versus living here but serving somewhere else? I suspect that's when they're going to look a little bit deeper to make sure we have an understanding of what is their use of this property if we're granting this exemption.
Right. I guess I would say serving elsewhere. And what does quote unquote officiating clergy mean? If they conduct a service once or twice a year, does that cover that? Or must they be the full-time pastor of that church or religious leader of a congregation?
That's a great question. I think I'd have to dig in a little bit more. That might be even something we go up to legal, general counsel's office to make sure we can give you as clear an answer as possible.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, if you want to email me offline, why don't we'll get you an answer. Great. And then I'm going to move on to Rob's question, if that's okay. Some volunteers find the water and sewer tax exemption burdensome and long. Unfortunately, that's not our office. My understanding, I think water and sewer tax is a DEP, right? Environmental protection. Any help from our office? Why don't you email me offline what the question is, and I'll ask around to see if we have any contacts at other agencies that we can get you a clear answer. I've heard that from individual homeowners and business owners, at least the burden element. But again, if you have a specific question, we can maybe put you in touch with the right parties to try and get you some guidance there. Great. Christopher Turner, at what point does a non-for-profit tenant or a non-for-profit landlord disrupt or disqualify tax exemption in whole or in part? Oh, okay. So I think we'd have to dig into this question as to what the disruption is. If it's a sale, then we can point to an exact point in time, right? That's a change in ownership. When we say disrupt or disqualify, Mr. Turner, did you want to dig in a little bit more there?
Hi, Robin. Thanks. Actually, it's about when you've got a non-profit tenant and a non-profit landlord. So if you've got a non-profit building and they're renting it out to somebody, it's kind of an extension of the parsonage question, but just broader. You know, if you've got a tenant in there, they are a non-profit. Is there a point at which that building owner, that religious building owner, has to be worried that they might lose their tax exemption because they're not using it for their use?
If the tenant is not using it for that use, that very much could be a reason for losing the exemption. We do know that, because if you are leasing to another non-for-profit that meets a qualifying use, then of course, we can help advocate and make sure you get what you're entitled to. But I do believe if we do find, and why don't you email me? Because we've heard both sides where we've been able to advocate or able to help clarify or provide some more guidance where it's very clear this doesn't feel right. In the alternative, I've also seen the other sides where now we've seen not necessarily a parsonage, but I think it was just recently I heard about it was an educational organization that became part dormitory, part religious service, and then at the ground floor was also their shop. And we had to explain to them, like, listen, like this last part, you are now leasing out to someone else. It is not for educational use. It's not for dorm. It doesn't meet any of the other. In fact, it is very much an enterprise. It's a commercial enterprise. So I think it at least at the renewal cycle, the investigations will happen if there are any changes.
Yeah, we're often working with churches that, we're helping them find non-profit tenants, right? They're other churches or other denominations or their schools or their some other use. So sometimes it's healthcare, believe it or not, right? And so it's not always clear. And
it is not always clear. I hear you on that one.
Yeah.
On our end too, or we look a little bit further, or even you look on Google Maps, just a little bit curious and you can see it's clearly a commercial enterprise, or it's clearly not what was
Mhm.
stated or what has been represented year over year.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your email address again?
Sure,
Oh,
absolutely.
oh, it's here,
Lee
leerobin@finance.nyc.
Robin, perfect. Yes, absolutely. You've
Kate
got
just
it.
put it on.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Kate. So I don't want to run into the next session, but let's see.
I think there's just one more
One
question.
more. Thank you. How do you get a tax exemption for a property owned by an LLC, which the LLC itself is owned by a nonprofit? Okay, so I think that's going to go to the fact that the owner, owned by an LLC. That's, let's connect offline because I suspect you may run into some issues. It may, if it's a matter of purely your articles of incorporation can demonstrate anything in certain directions. Yeah, just file the application and send it, and then we'll go from there. If you're denied, we can help you navigate that.
All right, thank you so much, Robin. Really
Absolutely.
appreciate you.
Thanks for your
taking the
time and thanks for letting me
That
go
was-
over.
That was super helpful. Yeah, I dropped your email to the folks who had outstanding questions who you said email you.
Please email me. Yes, absolutely. We're here for you.
And hopefully, we'll have you back soon.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you.
All right, so let's pass it over to Anne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Let me try and share my screen. Okay. Um, eh. All right, here we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I have had this job forever, and I know a number of you and your congregations. But the Sacred Sites program is part of a larger New York City-based nonprofit, the New York Landmarks Conservancy. We're having our 50th year this year. And we, under the umbrella of the Conservancy, there are a number of program areas. So Sacred Sites is just one area. We advocate for landmarks. We have a number of financial assistance programs. And we also offer hands-on technical assistance, especially to nonprofit owners of historic buildings. We sponsor this annual award ceremony for the best preservation projects in the city, the Lucy G. Moses Awards. This is at St. Bart's this year, and about 500 people attend these annual award ceremonies. They're a lot of fun. We have a number of small grant programs. One is our nonprofit technical assistance grant, which are grants of $5,000 to $30,000 to nonprofit owned historic buildings. And these are sectarian owned buildings, not religious owned buildings. We have emergency grants, again, for sectarian historic buildings in New York City. This is a very clear emergency where an SUV bashed into a historic building at historic Richmond Town on Staten Island. That's the kind of thing that we help with on an emergency basis. We operate a preservation hotline, and this is something that owners of older religious buildings certainly can avail themselves of. We make referrals to architects, to structural engineers, to contractors. And you can call us with your historic building problem, masonry, roofing. And it might, and often does, warrant a site visit to actually understand your problem better, as opposed to just what you can tell us on the phone. But we do try and help if we can. We also offer hands-on technical assistance. This is a pastor of the Rossville AME Zion Church on Staten Island. the church owns 3 individually designated cottages immediately across the street from the church. And we provided referrals and helped fund roofing for one of these cottages that had really bad water damage. And for the church itself, we both offered Sacred Sites grants to help fund a new roof for the church and new entrance doors. But we also were very hands-on with this project. We referred them to a carpenter to fabricate these doors. We worked with the congregation and with the Landmarks Commission to design the doors based on historic photographs, but make sure that they also met the security and light needs of the church. They had non-historic doors that were vandalized and they needed to replace them quickly. And so, we were able to help them get these new doors fabricated, and then with a Sacred Sites grant, help them actually fund the doors and the roof on the church. The Conservancy operates a revolving loan fund, and this is just a number of examples of projects that the Conservancy has lent funds to. The really special thing about the Conservancy's revolving loan fund is that it's not just a mortgage, it's not just a loan, it comes with project management assistance. So the Conservancy staff meets with the building owner on a weekly or bi-weekly basis throughout construction, and really acts as the owner's representative, helping to identify the architect or construction manager, helping to identify the contractor, and then helping to work out any problems that arise during construction. Churches can qualify for these loans, but the Conservancy obviously does not want to foreclose on a religious institution, on a church or synagogue or mosque or temple. So the churches and synagogues and mosques and temples that can secure a historic properties fund loan would be those that have reserve funds that can be escrowed and used as collateral, or that own property, other property, or rental property, or even, a parsonage or apartment that's housing for their clergy that can be collateralized. It's not quite as awful for us to foreclose on an apartment as on a house of worship. In 40 years, I think we've only had 1 or 2 loans that failed to move forward to fruition. So to qualify for our revolving loan program, you have to be either in a New York City historic district or individually designated a New York City landmark, or listed on the National Register, or eligible for listing on the National Register. And now the Sacred Sites program, which is specifically working with religious institutions. This year will be our 14th annual Sacred Sites open house. The 3rd weekend in May, we invite our grantees and our religious property awardees and anyone really interested in participating to open their doors and invite in visitors. And we coerce many of our architect friends to lead tours of recent projects at religious institutions. So it's also, a chance to show off recent work. But we hear from visitors all the time. I work in this neighborhood, I walk by this synagogue every day, and I've never been inside. So obviously there are security issues with opening your doors, but we've had great participation, usually about 100 sites throughout the state, because the Conservancy Sacred Sites program is actually statewide. Last year we had about 60 sites statewide and 40 sites in New York City, but some years we've had as many as 125 participating sites. We partner or do our best to partner with not only architects who have done recent renovation projects, but also preservation groups and cultural groups to offer lectures and concerts. This was a tour and a book event at Holy Trinity on East 88th Street and Carnegie Hill on the Upper East Side, an Episcopal church. They have these windows by a British pre-Raphaelite artist. And so the author of a recent book on that window designer led this tour and spoke about the windows. I'm showing the slide of our Tourist in Your Own Town videos, which our president, Peg Breen, hosts, because Anshe Chesed was featured in one of our earlier Tourist in Your Own Town videos. So these are little short videos that come out usually monthly about different publicly accessible historic buildings around the city. And this was shortly after Anshe Chesed was included in the expanded historic district around West End Avenue that we did this video. So the Conservancy is 50 years old, as I said, and we've always offered grants and loans to historic religious properties. But in 1986, we actually formally launched a separate sacred sites program, recognizing that historic religious buildings and landmarks are a really special kind of building with special needs and a special character, and deserving their own program. I joined the Conservancy in 2001, and I've been director of the program since 2002. This is just a community service project at one of our longtime grantees in South Bushwick. As I mentioned, our program is statewide, and this is a fairly typical distribution of grant awards. This was our most recent grant round. So we offer consulting grants or matching grants of up to $15,000 for architectural, engineering, and construction management services within New York City on a rolling basis throughout the year. So congregations can apply at any time for architectural services to guide the planning of a program. So to do an overall conditions assessment of a building, or to do plans and specifications for a specific, usually exterior repair project. So most of what we fund is the exterior of the building. What's regulated in terms of landmarks is the outside envelope of a religious building. So we're talking about roofs and masonry walls or carpentry elements of the exterior, windows and doors, structural elements, which obviously are often inside. So, rotted floor joists or rotted roof framing would be eligible, but mostly it's things on the exterior of the building. I mentioned that South Bushwick Reformed Church is a longtime grantee. So we did our first grant here in 1986, but they've received multiple grants over the years. Another longtime grantee, and I saw earlier that we had a trustee here from St. Paul and St. Andrew. I would have included a slide if I had known, but Kay and St. Paul and St. Andrew are longtime multiple grantees. We have a 3-year moratorium between exterior restoration grants, but we do have congregations that come back to us regularly every 3 to 5 years for another grant. The Conservancy helped plan and manage and fund comprehensive exterior restoration here at South Bushwick starting in 2021. Their spire is leaning backwards about 2 feet. So basically, this is the most elaborate multi-stage wooden steeple in New York City. Among the designated wooden churches, of which there are about 10. This one is the fanciest, and it dates from 1852. It was enlarged with the lower side aisles in the 1880s, but at the attic level, at the roof level, they underframed the base of the spire. So every time there's a big wind event, the steeple would rock, and luckily it rocked and settled backwards and not towards the street, because I think that would have been much more alarming. But they have major violations, the kind of things that could cause them to lose their tax exemption. And that's one problem here that I hadn't thought about until today. So yay. Thank you, Jason, for bringing that up. I'm sorry. I think I have, so we funded the stabilization of the Spire in 2021. We helped them raise funds from other sources beyond the Conservancy, including New York City's Landmarks Commission's grant program. In very recent years has started considering occasional grants to religious owned landmarks. And as long as there's not worship taking place in the building component that they're funding, and because this was just the spire, and there's no worship going on in the spire, even though it's hard to argue that the steeple is not a religious element of the building, somehow that made it through Corp Council, and the city was able to put $30,000 into this project. We got $25,000 from the National Trust, National Fund, and the Conservancy has put in tens of thousands of dollars on this project over the last several years. So we've stabilized the spire, and now we're moving on to the soffits, the edges of the roof, the gutters, which are basically rotten and falling off of the building. While our grants are not huge, our current grant maximum is $50,000. Our involvement often helps congregations leverage additional outside funding. So here, this is the First Ukrainian Assembly of God Church, also known as the Cornerstone Church, in Cooper Square in the East Village. The church has been here in this former bank building and New York City landmark since 1937, when the neighborhood was really a Ukrainian neighborhood. And our initial grant helped fund architectural services for construction documents, for restoring the masonry facade and mansard roof. And our pledge of $50,000 towards at least $500,000 of facade repair helped the church secure a $500,000 New York State restoration grant. Now, those grants are incredibly competitive and hard for a religious institution to access. Last year, when they were awarded the grant, the war had just started, and they're helping refugees, and they're helping prevent Ukrainian women from being trafficked when they arrive here. So they had a great story, and the state funded them. But it didn't hurt that we were involved, and that there was an architect on board with experience in this kind of building. It's rare for there to be a New York City religious property that hasn't, sometime in the last 40 years, gotten a grant from the Conservancy Sacred Sites program, but this was one that last year applied for the grant, and we'd never heard from them before. So it's on West 11th Street in the Village. The church was originally a Baptist church with funding from Rockefeller, with these beautiful stained glass windows, and we funded structural repairs at the foundation level with $20,000 towards a $100,000 project, and that's pretty typical of the scale of our grants. This is Mount Calvary St. Mark's, the merged congregation. It's in the newish Dorrance Brook Square Historic District in Harlem, which is the same historic district that Reverend Pierce's church is in. Like many 1920s buildings, like on Chesed, there are multiple setbacks and flat roofs, which become swimming pools if they're not properly maintained. And that was the case with the tower, the central tower roof here. The church had this major deferred maintenance on its roofs, and so its sanctuary was closed because the chronic tower roof leaks dangerously destabilized the sanctuary plaster. During the course of construction, and this church, because it had a merger and there was another Methodist church 2 blocks away within the same historic district, and that church has been sold, and the income from that sale helped fund this repair project. But in the middle of this $2.2 million exterior envelope repair project, they uncovered this very corroded steel at the tower level, this steel is what's supporting the parapets and the corner spires. And so there was a big change order that they weren't anticipating. And so our grant of about $25,000 helped fund the $30,000 change order for reinforcing the steel at this parapet. And this is just the project team, a trustee, the engineer, the contractor, and one of our trustees, a Conservancy board member, Kelly Newsom, who is intrepid enough to go up on the scaffolding with us. So that's it. I wanted to leave time for questions. Happy to take questions and stop sharing my screen. Oops, stop share. Okay, there we go.
I asked Kate's permission to go ahead and ask a question verbally because my fingers don't type too well on my iPad. Anyway, Anne, good to see you. Bill Shillady.
Yep.
We've connected over the years.
Yep.
So one of the things that I'm wondering about, and you know, the state and the federal government have this historic tax credit program for private homeowners.
Right.
And is there anyone thinking about a way to possibly find religious organizations or not-for-profits that could in some way sell those tax credits if they're doing a major project on their facility? Because as we know, and Kay Carpin could confess, the projects, your grants are great, but they don't cover as much as major projects sometimes do.
Right. No, our grants are small. Kay and his church actually did secure one of those very competitive state grants. Now they're $500,000. Then I think it was $300,000 or so, but they weren't able to move forward with that because there were other priorities, like paying off the accessibility project at St. Paul and St. Andrews, so that and the condoizing of the food pantry, so that the project for which they had applied for the grant didn't move forward, and they lost that state grant because if you don't spend it, it goes away. But there are state grants potentially for National Register listed properties. When we go out to talk to religious institutions about accessing our little grants, and then potentially state grants, we talk about National Register listing and not about local landmark designation, because the universe of National Register eligible sites is actually a lot bigger. And the last 15 years, the Conservancy has helped 50 religious properties, mostly in New York City, a few in Westchester, get listed on the National Register to access both our funding and potentially state grant funding. And a few of them have actually gotten the state grant. In terms of tax credits, the only tax credits that I'm aware of that a religious institution can access through syndication to an investor who pays taxes is the federal rehabilitation tax credit, not the New York State tax credit. It's possible that the New York State tax credit would also apply in the case of a syndicated rehabilitation project, but those are very tricky and complicated, and the only religious example in recent years that I'm familiar with is not Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian in Fort Greene, but Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian in Buffalo, which was an enormous church with about 15 active members. And then after a new young pastor joined, maybe they were up to 80 members. They had not just an enormous church and sanctuary and undercroft, they had a 1920s community wing with parlors and bowling alleys and a log cabin and the basement, just like enormous. And so they converted that community wing to 16 rental apartments. And that conversion cost was a syndicated tax credit project where their investor benefited from the tax credits, and funded the renovation of the church. So, you know, if the church maintains ownership, so, and if there's a development partner and a partial commercial reuse of a portion of the building, then tax credits can be accessed. But I can't think of a scenario in which just renovating the church for, or repairing the church for church use could qualify for either the state or the federal tax credit. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, the benefit of, you know, National Register listing, New York City has such a strong landmarks ordinance that it's a scary thing for most congregations to contemplate. I mean, it can always happen. The commission could always come along and designate, even if a religious institution was not in favor of that designation. But they generally don't go out of their way unless a building is threatened to designate if a congregation or community opposes that designation. But the only benefit of New York City landmark designation is access to our program, and we're not a very big carrot. National Register listing, at least, you know, has no regulatory implication. So you can, you know, tear the building down. It just means you wouldn't be listed on the National Register anymore. If you do get one of those $500,000 state grants, then there is a covenant agreement that the religious institution has to enter into to protect the public investment in your privately owned religious institution for a period of 20 or 25 years. But I think there's even a workaround for that. You know, if a church were to be redeveloped during that period, the state grant would need to be repaid out of the proceeds of the development. So, any other questions at all? I mean,
I guess I had a question. So I guess two parts. Who would be, you know, the best candidate or the typical candidate that applies for grants with you? And do they have to have done any like pre-work before they approach you?
No, I mean, we're, you know, because we're statewide and we're traveling and we're visiting and sitting with people. So all of our 50 to 60 grant applications a year, we meet with and we travel upstate and visit with. And once we've done that, once we've sat down with you to discuss your congregation's building and needs and all the good work you're doing in your facility, it's very hard for us not to give you a grant of some kind. So we have Stockholm syndrome. We're easy. But often congregations come to us with projects that are not really either not a good fit for our program. So we don't fund, you know, new kitchens and bathrooms. We don't fund new HVAC systems. We don't fund, we don't currently even have funding to fund accessibility, which I'd really like to identify a funder and be able to fund accessibility projects because it's so important. We've done workshops on accessibility and best practices, but we're not currently able to fund that. So we're funding basically, you know, roofs and windows, masonry repair. If you come to us and you say, you know, I want to repair these stained glass windows and I can't open your front door because your building has settled so badly that the doors don't work anymore, I'm going to say, no, you need an engineer is what you need, and we'll fund that first. So there's a fair amount of redirection among applicants. And we ask applicants to call us just to make sure that the project that they're thinking about or trying to fundraise for is eligible before they waste a lot of time on our grant application. But we work with you where you are, and we do our best. And, you know, if we don't have the answer, then we call Kate or we call Jason and get the congregation help that way. So.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So I guess the first step, if they'd be interested, would be to reach out to you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
you know, we've gotten a lot of sites listed in the National Register and therefore eligible for our grant program via a class at Columbia University that was teaching students how to write National Register nominations. That class was taught every other year. It's not being taught this year. So occasionally we have foundation funding to list sites. The other thing we've done is we've tried to be proactive about vulnerable sites that weren't on our radar. So we've gone out and surveyed, to the best of our ability, all of the, with the focus on pre-war buildings, all of the older religious buildings in the city. And we're just about done. We have a couple of summers left in the Bronx. But we started looking at Catholic churches and then synagogues and then the whole universe. And so we've identified a number of eligible sites that way and have, you know, helped these sites get listed on the National Register and then gone on to fund projects there. So.
Great, thanks. So there's a question in the chat about your contact or Colleen's or whoever the best person is to contact.
Yeah,
so
so our contact is on the last page of that slide that you're going to send around to everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then Rashida, I saw you had your hand up. Did you have a question? But now it's not up, so maybe not.
No, I'm in a kind of loud place. So I wasn't sure if it would be heard. But I did just want to see if we could circle back about applying, or churches that would like to apply for funds to help with roof repair and other repairs that are active congregations, because I believe there was another organization out there, and you know, I'll just use an example. My church applied. They said we cannot help active congregations, and so I'm sorry, I'm in a loud place. You could have went over that. Is there any way you can just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. We are only fund active congregations. So you're exactly, you know, who we're looking for. The Conservancy is a completely secular organization, and my program has no religious component, but there's so little funding out there beyond what you can raise within your congregation for religious institutions that, you know, this program was really conceived as a program for active houses of worship. The more active you are in terms of serving your community, the better you're going to score in our rubric. So if you're only open for worship once or twice a week, you're not going to score as well as a religious institution that's hosting senior programs and after-school programs and cultural programs, concerts, you know, and we actually ask our applicants for an informal census of all of the non-member individuals who come through the doors in the course of a year. And I think St. Paul and St. Andrew is our poster child for that, because there's so many hundreds of, you know, tens of thousands of people who come through their doors for various programs for various reasons during the course of a year. And that helps us raise money, because we're going out to foundations and secular funders, and we're arguing not only are these really special buildings architecturally and really important to, you know, help them keep the roof on, but they're also just providing tremendous community service, and you know, they're a tremendous community resource, and that the majority of our applicants are serving at least 10 times their member numbers with programs, and often, like St. Paul and St. Andrew, many times 10 times their member numbers with programs and services. So. Anything else?
There's just a question in the chat from Dr. Debbie.
Okay. We do fund, you saw the Ukrainian church in my slideshow, if you were around for the slideshow. We do fund buildings not built as religious institutions that are now serving as religious institutions. We serve, you know, we fund churches and former synagogues and, you know, all kinds of recycled buildings, as long as the building has some kind of historic status. So that's going to be the challenge. Is it in a historic district? If it's a standalone, if it's a brownstone in a row, but it's not in a National Register or New York City Historic District, it's going to be hard to fund you because you may not qualify for the National Register on your own. Although cultural significance is appreciated, I think, more effectively by the State Historic Preservation Office than often it is by the New York City Landmarks Commission. Not because the Landmarks Commission doesn't appreciate cultural significance, but because our landmarks ordinance is so strong, there's a reluctance to designate and regulate buildings if they're not kind of a monumental kind of building. So if that makes sense. But you should definitely, it's in a historic landmark block. Absolutely. So I know which mosque you're talking about. And it's absolutely eligible for our program and continues to be eligible. So, and Brooklyn Heights is our poster child for Sacred Sites Open House, which unfortunately often occurs during Ramadan, which is a lot to ask for people to open their doors during Ramadan, but during the day. But it's Brooklyn Heights has so many churches and synagogues and cathedrals, often on the same block, that it makes for great walking tours. So it's also a place where we've done a lot of grants.
Any final questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you so much. I think that was really helpful. I'm really helpful for me too. I have a few questions I'll follow up with you with. But yeah, I think
A lot
that's
from those
so
Hunter
important.
graduate students, especially one of them. So.
And it's just such an important program for folks to be aware of if they're not already, and just understand the nuances of. So I'm really glad that everyone had an opportunity to hear about it and that you're able to take the time to share all of that with us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, always good to see you. Anne and I talk all the time. So okay, so as we're wrapping up here, just wanted to remind everyone that our next meeting is next year in 2024, but if not March, February 7th. It's already on your calendar. And I will be emailing folks, as I mentioned, about your contributions. As we said, the year is halfway over already. So get your contributions in, ideally before the end of the year. And if you want to do any individual giving to us, that would also be, highly appreciated. And then, like I said, extra benefit, no more emails from me about this for the rest of the year. There is also an Attorney General event tonight that we just sent out a reminder email about at 5:30 in East Harlem, that I'll be on one of the panels. Matt Murphy will be on the panel, LISC and Enterprise, and all those folks talking about building primarily affordable housing. Thanks so much, Dr. Debbie. It was really good to see everyone. Rashida, did you have something to add before we closed?
Yeah, sure. I think I would be remiss if I didn't let everyone know about the social justice training coming up on December 14th from 6 to 8 p.m. and it's Zoom. And that information, I'll drop it in the chat, or you can send it around after the meeting. And that is, again, a partnership event. The partnership, of course, is a collaboration between Bricks and Mortals, the New York City Council of Churches, and the Interfaith Assembly on Housing and Homelessness, and the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative. And so, I just wanted to drop that in there and let anyone else, if they wanted to join, know about the event.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. I hope everyone has a not too crazy December and really great holidays and New Year, and we'll see you officially next in February, but likely before then, since I see all you amazing folks often, it's my pleasure. So yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for being here.
Same to you, Kate.
Adjourned.
Thank you,
Good
Kate. Thanks,
meeting.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.